Hello, well I've been sewing up some wallets of recent in natural russet veg tan leather, and it's quite a good discipline actually, because it makes you think about a few of your processes which can either make the leather work and the sewing easier or make the whole operation cleaner. So obviously this sort of leather marks as soon as you look at it. So I thought I'd just share about 5 or 6 little tips that I've found along the way which perhaps might be useful with your leather work. So let's get going. Well, first thing to say, I do find a little anvil. This is a 20 kilogram anvil, so perhaps not quite so small, but I find it incredibly useful for when I'm sort of hammering and punching and doing stitch holes, etc. And this might be something which perhaps affects, depending where you live in the world, humidity and condensation are quite a problem. And I have a little dehumidifier in my workshop which helps, but obviously this is a huge thermal mass that gets very cold. So what I've done is I've made a little polythene pocket cover for it, and it keeps it warm. I know it sounds ridiculous. I no longer have a condensation and a rust problem. I leave a little air gap there and it seems to hold the heat and it keeps it all rather nice. So that's, if you like, my first little tip. My second tip is actually related to the anvil, because when I'm punching things like stitch holes, so this sort of thing where I've got a row of stitch holes and I'm using a stitching chisel, I find that sometimes the board gets sort of carries marks through onto the leather. So what I'm doing now, I'm just putting a sheet of very thin paper over, and then I hammer through, and I find that I'm not transferring any sort of dirt and muck off the board, and I'm not getting any indentations coming through. And I'm doing the same thing on my desk. When I'm working with these very light leathers, I'm putting a bit of paper on my desk, like a tablecloth, and it just stops one transferring any little sort of grease mark or anything else. So there are a couple of sort of fairly immediate short ones. Wanted to show you 3 or 4 other little things just found useful. When you want to get a nice sort of straight line of holes, I know a lot of leather workers use a pair of dividers and they go down to get a line for stitch marking, and they work absolutely fine. It occurred to me as I had this on my bench the other day, my saddler's crease, double crease here, screw crease, I thought, oh, perhaps that would also work quite well. And it does, it's quite effective actually. So I mean, just to show you the sort of thing I mean, you can get yourself a nice little crease line which you can then use for doing your stitch marking. So it's just another little way of doing it. It gives you quite a nice definite impression, and it's quite comfortable and perhaps a bit more controllable. So that's one more. A couple of other things I thought I'd just mention which could be helpful is when you're trying to stick like wallet dividers into position, you want to be able to sort of maneuver them and then press them down once you've got them in the right place. And I find using a bit of this like double-sided tape, I use it quite a lot in leathercraft, I find it very good because you can undo it if you get it in the wrong place. It has a bit of tack so you can sort of move and shift, but it's like sellotape, it's double-sided, and you can hold, you know, seams. You get it in different widths as well. Now where you've got something like an outside edge where you want things to be a bit more solid and robust, then that's where some leather adhesive is useful. And what you can do is you can get a big pot of it and then undo the end of the tube and put more in the tube, or you can just use the tubes, but you don't use actually very much. They go a long way. So in this particular one's a Bostik leather adhesive, clear, but you just put it on both surfaces, let them get tacky dry, and then you can press them together. And there's enough maneuverability to be able to get something where you want it, and then you can press it harder going around with your fingers and get it all nice and firm, and that gives you a lovely firm sort of stuck bond for then getting on with your punching and sewing, etc. But yes, double-sided tape, quite useful for positioning before machining, etc., or sewing. And then the glue, where you want a seam to perhaps last a lot longer when it's in active use. The next little tip, which I know I've mentioned before, these patchwork type rotary knives are actually very good for leather work, and you can cut quite thick pieces with them. They've got nice safety blades. I find them really good, and I find the larger blade version, which is what this one is, they're a lot better than the smaller blade version, but yeah, the smaller blades work perfectly okay. The blades are fairly expensive, but what you can do is you can strop them. So just get a bit of rough leather, put some sharpening compound on, so that's any like green wax compound you can get from a tool shop, or white, or different colours, different grades, but get some compound, put it on the leather, and then just go up and down the leather sharpening the blade. You can take the blade out, and if you're wearing gloves, because they're very sharp all around, it's a real sort of danger thing, so do be careful if you do this. But if you want to take the blade out, wear some thick heavy duty like welder's gloves, and then hold the blade and strop it up and down, and you really can restore the edge and get it lovely and sharp like new again. It doesn't take much, and you know you're sharpening it because you're leaving behind like a black residue of the metal as it comes off. But I find it keeps them going. I then usually replace them after one sharpening, but it does extend the life twice over. They just unscrew at the back here, so it's very easy, take them out. But as I say, the blades are obviously very sharp and very dangerous if you're holding that, so make sure you've got good hand protection, otherwise you'll get a nasty injury off a sharp blade. But yeah, you can flip them up and down, put them back in, and carry on using them. My last little, call it an observation or tip, but it might prove useful to you, is to bear in mind that different makes of these little stitching chisels, there are different sort of levels of fatness to the blades, and it became very apparent today when I was doing some sewing. I have here a fine small chisel, and it does the holes nice and close together. I also have a medium where it's wider spacing. What did surprise me though actually was I did a little test sewing of some 0.6mm Ritzer tiger thread and doing saddle stitch, and I could see daylight between the stitches, which rather suggests that if those stitches were to break, they wouldn't be held in the leather as well as they should be. You really want the stitches to be held firmly in tight holes, not to see daylight around the holes. And it surprised me because it was a small stitching chisel, 0.6mm thread. Anyway, the medium chisel I have here, the teeth look a lot slimmer. So I punched a row of holes and stitched along it, and obviously they're larger stitches, but there's no daylight. And when you examine the teeth, as I say, these ones are quite slim. Let me try and hold them close in. So this is the medium chisel, and the other one is the fine chisel. If I rotate them slowly to try and catch the light a little bit, you can perhaps see that the teeth on the medium, so that's the one I'm waving, the teeth on the medium chisel are a lot slimmer than the teeth on the small chisel. Hence, actually, in terms of making the thread sit in the hole, if it's a 0.6 thread one's using, this medium chisel is far better. I thought it gave quite an attractive stitch, and it's the top line of stitching here. I've gone back under stitching at the end here. But yeah, that's with a medium. So moral of that one is, look at the thickness of the teeth on your stitching chisel when you're deciding whether it fits the thread or not. So thought that might be useful, not immediately obvious. So there you are, a few little leather hints and tips and observations, which I hope you find helpful. If you want me to provide more of these in the future, I can. It's the usual thing, isn't it, in leather work? As you drill in deep into trying different techniques or trying something, you pick up little hints and tips which perhaps are useful to other people to have a ponder on and decide whether or not it's one that suits you or not. But anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next film. Bye bye.